Conrad is a young teenager living in a quiet suburb with his family. Conrad is going through a difficult period after the death of his older brother Back, who died in a boating accident. This tragic accident was a turning point for the entire family. Conrad's father Calvin tries to support his son, but he himself is also deeply hurt, caught between trying to mend his relationship with Conrad and his own worries. Conrad's mother Beth seems cold and emotionally detached. She is focused on maintaining the appearance of an ideal life despite the internal crisis. Conrad has just been discharged from a psychiatric hospital where he was sent after a suicide attempt. He tries to return to normal life, attending school and seeing friends, but internally he is still deeply depressed and feels guilt over his brother's death. Conrad sees Dr. Berger, a psychotherapist, in an attempt to make sense of his feelings. Dr. Berger is someone Conrad can trust, and he gradually opens up to him. In the first sessions, Conrad tries to hide his real emotions, claiming that everything is fine, when in fact he is suffering from severe inner pain and isolation. Gradually through therapy we learn more about the tragedy that has befallen the family. Conrad and his brother Back were caught in a storm while boating, and as a result of this accident Back drowned. Conrad feels that he should have saved his brother, and this guilt haunts him. He believes that his mother will never forgive him because, in her eyes, Conrad is to blame for the death of her favorite son. In reality, Beth has always favored Buck, and her attitude toward Conrad after his death has only exacerbated his feelings of guilt and rejection. Conrad also faces difficulties at school. He feels like an outsider among his peers. He finds it difficult to maintain the same old relationships with his friends because he has changed so much since the tragedy. Conrad was a member of the school swim team, but now he can't bring himself to go back to practice. In one scene, his former swim coach tries to convince him to return to the team, but Conrad abruptly refuses, feeling that he no longer belongs in this world. At the same time, his friend Lazenby tries to support Conrad by inviting him to meetings and parties, but their interactions become strained as Conrad can't quite recapture his former friendship. The relationship between Conrad and his parents is strained. Father Calvin tries to understand his son and tries to establish contact with him. He sincerely wants to help Conrad cope with his pain, but he doesn't know how to do it himself. He realizes that he has lost not only one son but, in a sense, a second son, as Conrad has become emotionally unavailable and distant. Calvin also feels that their marriage to Beth has begun to crumble. Beth on the other hand tries to avoid any discussion of the tragedy and ignore the problem. She is unwilling to talk about Baca or Conrad's feelings, preferring to pretend that everything is fine. This leads to even more alienation within the family. Conrad gradually begins to open up to Dr. Berger. In one of his sessions, he finally talks about his guilt over his brother's death and how hard it is for him to live with the thought. Dr. Berger helps Conrad understand that his guilt is what is keeping him from moving on. He explains that Conrad was not responsible for Back's death and that guilt is his way of avoiding real feelings and pain. This conversation becomes an important moment for Conrad as he begins to realize that his suffering has deep roots. During this time, Conrad begins a new relationship with a girl named Janine, who sings in the school choir. Janine becomes a bright spot in Conrad's life. She is kind and understanding, and he begins to feel affection for her. They begin to spend more time together and their relationship gradually develops. Conrad feels something like joy and support for the first time in a long time. In one scene, they go on a date and Conrad opens up to her about his worries. Janine appears willing to listen to him, which brings him some relief. Even so, the tension in the family continues to grow. In one scene, there is a sharp conflict between Conrad and his mother Beth when he tries to talk to her about Baca. She is unwilling to listen and walks away from the conversation, which hurts Conrad deeply. He realizes that his mother will never forgive him or be able to love him the way she loved Baca. This leads to a big emotional explosion. Conrad comes home from a date with Janine and suddenly confronts Beth, which escalates into an argument. Beth accuses him of ruining their family and Conrad accuses her of being cold and unable to express love. After this fight, Calvin begins to realize how serious the situation is. He realizes that his marriage to Beth can no longer exist in the same form. Calvin tries to talk to Beth about the problems in the family and the need to be more open and honest with each other. He expresses his pain at Beth's inability to show love and care to either him or Conrad. However, Beth is not ready for this change. Eventually, Calvin realizes that their marriage is doomed, and this leads to the decision to divorce. Conrad and Calvin are left alone together. Beth leaves, and this becomes a symbol that they can no longer be one family. Calvin stays with Conrad, and a closer bond is formed between them. They begin to talk to each other more openly, sharing their feelings and supporting each other. Conrad, thanks to Dr. Berger's help, begins to realize that he is not responsible for his brother's death and that his life has value. He gradually accepts his feelings and finds the strength to move on with his life. The movie ends on a positive note. Although the Jarrett family will no longer be what it used to be, Conrad and Calvin begin the healing process. Conrad slowly learns to forgive himself and realize that he needs to live his life rather than trying to conform to his mother's expectations or feel guilty about the past. There is hope for restoration in their lives and that they can deal with their grief and find a new understanding of each other.